Hey everyone, I'm Victor, and today I want to give you 10 practical tips for making your text look good. But before we begin, don't forget to like this video, drop a comment below, tell me what you think, it really helps small channels like mine. Now, let's get started. Tip number 1. Contrast. Contrast and color use are vital to accessibility. Users, including users with visual disabilities, must be able to perceive content on the page. A little bit of theory first. In WCAG2, contrast is a measure of the difference in perceived luminance or brightness between two colors. This brightness difference is expressed as a ratio ranging from 1 to 1, for example, white on white, to 21 to 1, for example, black on white. So let's take a look at this text. It has a light gray color and pure white background. The ratio is 2.25, which means that the text is really hard to read. Now let's reduce the lightness a bit, and here we go. The ratio is 7.38, that passes both AA and AAA requirements. By the way, the minimum requirement for the contrast ratio is 4.5, but it doesn't mean that this text is easy to read. Take a look at these examples. All of them pass AA requirement, but I wouldn't say that they are easy to read. So 4.5 is the minimum requirement. How do we know what contrast the text has? There is a formula for that, but instead of manually calculating, you can go to this site and just put the colors there. I will drop the link in the description. Tip number 2. This tip is directly related to the previous one. A common mistake is that it's often hard to read the text that you put on images. One of the possible solutions is to make a dark overlay to increase the contrast. Tip number 3. Container width. When you have a wide text container, it becomes hard to read the text. That happens because our eyes move in the so-called Z pattern. To fix that, we should simply reduce the container width. Let's take a look at a practical example. So here we have a huge and long text. When you read a line in the text and then return back, it will be challenging to find the following line. Now let's reduce the width of the container. And now it becomes much easier to read. Usually the line height should be around maybe 50 to 70 characters long. Tip number 4. Line height. This is my favorite one. The more text you have, the bigger the line height should be. For general text, a good option would be around 1.5. For headings that have a large font size, the line height should be smaller. The reason is that headings are already easy to read because of their large font size. Tip number 5. That's an easy one, actually. The thing is that if you use pure black color, it looks a bit heavy, so it's considered a good practice to make it a bit lighter. Even though the difference isn't that huge, it's still more pleasant for your eyes. It applies to other elements as well, for example such elements as table borders. By the way, don't forget to subscribe if you like my content, I would really appreciate it. Tip number 6. Text centering. If you center a long text, it will not be convenient for users to read it. The reason is that the beginning of every new line has its starting point. Hence, you'll need to move your eyes to a different place every time you go to the following line. Aligned text is much easier to read. However, there is an exception. If you have a couple of lines, it's not a big deal if the text is centered or not. Usually, it's okay to center headings. Both aligned and centered headings are okay. Tip number 7. This is a very common mistake that I see all the time. There is a UX Gestalt law called proximity law. Objects that are near or proximate to each other tend to be grouped together. So you should put headings closer to the paragraphs they belong to. For example, here we can see that headings have exactly the same space between paragraphs. It means that it will take some time to understand what heading belongs to what paragraph. And in this case, it's obvious. Tip number 8. Make sure that your links look like links. While this tip might sound obvious, I want to show you my favorite example. This is a screenshot from Twitter Analytics. For quite a long time, I was trying to find a way to open an actual tweet. It turned out that I can do this by clicking on Date. It's not common because, well, usually if you have a date that is a link, you get all the tweets that were made that day. Tip number 9. I often see landing pages that have the next mistake. They have a picture of something on one side and a heading with some description on the opposite side. This is a widely used pattern, but the font size of the text is so tiny that it doesn't cover even half of the image. White space is important, and we use it to separate blocks of your site. But here we have a picture, so the block consists of the image and the text. So what you should do is increase the font size. Let's take a look at this example. We see that the text is pretty small. We can increase its size, and I would also reduce the width of the container. Here it looks much better. In general, I would recommend using at least 16 pixels for font size. Tip number 10. I often see long text on landing pages. Nowadays, we have way too much information that we get from a lot of random sources. We literally have no time to read every site we visit carefully. If you don't write fiction, but a text for a landing page, then it would be better if you make your text less redundant. One of the tricks to hook users' attention is to break your text into a list of items. Usually it helps you to simplify the text, but also it's much easier to scan. Putting nice icons make it even more easier to separate your points and hook users' attention. So that's basically it. It's not a rocket science, but these tips might really help you to avoid some common mistakes, and believe me, I see them all the time and make these mistakes too. Also remember that there are always exceptions to the rules. So thank you guys, don't forget to like this video, consider subscribing if you like my content, and I wish you all the best and see you very soon.